Today we're going to look at the difference between the past simple and the past perfect. Both tenses are used to talk about the past, but they describe different moments in time. The past simple describes a completed action in the past, while the past perfect helps us explain which action happened first when we talk about two past actions. Let's begin with the past perfect structure. The past perfect is formed with had plus past participle. The auxiliary verb had is the same for all subjects: I, you, he, she, it, we, and they. For example, I had finished the report, she had invested her money, they had opened a new account. In spoken English we often use the contraction D, for example, I'd finished the report, she'd invested in the company. However, remember that D can also mean would, so we must understand the meaning from the context. Now let's look at how the past perfect works with the past simple. When we describe two actions in the past, the past perfect shows the earlier action, and the past simple shows the later action. For example, when Tom arrived home, I had already left. In this sentence, leaving happened first, and Tom's arrival happened later. Another example could be, yesterday I was very tired, because I hadn't slept well the night before. Here the lack of sleep happened earlier, and the feeling of being tired happened later. We often use time expressions such as already, before, after, when, and until with the past perfect. These words help clarify the order of events. For example, the banker had already processed the payment before the client arrived. She had saved enough money before she invested in the project. The company had shut down several branches before the new management took over. In each example, the first action is expressed in the past perfect, and the second action in the past simple. Now let's look at affirmative sentences. The structure is subject plus had plus past participle. For example, the company had invested in new technology before profits increased. The banker had approved the loan before the client signed the contract. They'd already transferred the money before the bank closed. These examples show how the past perfect helps explain the background of a past event. Next, let's consider negative sentences. To form the negative, we add not after had. The contracted form is hadn't. For example, I hadn't opened a savings account before I started my job. The company hadn't invested in the project before the market changed. They hadn't repaid their debt when the bank contacted them. Now let's look at questions. To form questions in the past perfect, we move the auxiliary had before the subject. For example, had you paid your bill before you left the hotel? Had the company hired anyone before you started working there? Had they invested in the business before the crisis began? These questions help us ask about earlier events in the past. Short answers follow a simple pattern using had. For example, had you paid the bill? Yes, I had, or no, I hadn't. Notice that we do not use contractions in positive short answers, but we usually use them in negative answers. Another important point is that the past perfect is especially useful in storytelling or explanations, because it helps the listener understand the sequence of past events. For example, the investor had studied the market carefully before he decided to invest. After the company had opened new offices, it began to attract more clients. The bank had already processed the payment when the customer called to ask about it. Finally, remember that the past simple is used when we simply describe a finished event in the past, without focusing on another earlier action. For example, she opened a bank account last year. The company started a new project in 2022, the client paid the loan yesterday. But when we need to explain that something happened before another past event, we use the past perfect. To summarize, the past simple describes completed actions in the past, while the past perfect helps us clarify which action happened earlier when two past actions are connected. By combining these two tenses, we can describe events more clearly and explain the order of past actions, especially when talking about experiences, stories, or situations such as work, business, and financial decisions.